Hi everybody, welcome to DSUR Foundation. My name is Manoj Swaminathan and today I am going to introduce you to the concept of aggregate safety reporting. Now, what do you mean by aggregate safety reports? You might have heard of terms such as PSURs or PADERs or PBRERs, right? Or there can be some other documents as well which would need submissions on a periodic basis, right? And even for clinical trials one would need to submit something called a DSURs. So these are aggregate safety reports, and I would just introduce you to the concept. I am not going to train you on how you prepare it, but then why these are needed and what significance do these documents hold. Now, there are terms like ICSR or case processing. Then you have the concept of signal management. You also have the concept of risk management. Then, in that case, why are aggregate safety reports required? Right. So you might wonder, when you already have case processing, you have signal management and risk management. Why do you need something additional, and that is aggregate safety reports? So that's something which I'm going to show you now. Now, before we proceed, I want to ask you this question. There are two statements and about two countries. Now, tell me what is the difference, or do you think is there any difference? Okay. The first one is for Canada. 100 people from Canada experienced anaphylaxis with the use of Covaxin. Okay, it's some vaccine. Okay, and the same vaccine was also used in India. 100 people from India experienced anaphylaxis or allergic reaction, a severe allergic reaction with the use of Covaxin. Now, these are two statements and from two countries. Is there any difference? Now, you would say the difference is Canada and India. So, that's okay, that's quite obvious. But then, apart from that, in terms of the sense that it makes, what do you think? Is there any difference? Think about it. What can be the various possibilities or considerations? That's something which we will learn, and then you'll be able to appreciate that yes, there is some difference between these two situations. Again, these are hypothetical situations, okay? Now, what can be the various possibilities or considerations? Let us start with the first one, and that is about population. Now, we had 100 cases from each of these countries, Canada and India. But then you also know that the population in these countries are different, right? So in India, India is world's second most populated country, and Canada doesn't have even say 1/6 of the population or even less, right? So it's different, right? So you cannot compare 100 cases in a 1.4 billion population or 100 cases in a lesser population, right? In some millions. So that is the first point. Now, how about the other vaccines available? Now, imagine this vaccine was used or is used for COVID, okay, COVID 19 infection. And how about the other vaccines that are available? Is it the only vaccine that is available that, okay, it was given in the whole population and say 100 people got the adverse event? How about, say, if you talk about the COVID vaccine itself, you have the Pfizer vaccine, you have the Moderna vaccine, then you also have the Janssen vaccine, right? So you also have the Novavax vaccine, and so on. There are so many vaccines available in the market, right? So is it really comparable? Then, how about the doses applied, right? So in India, if say there were almost say 500 million doses supplied, and in Canada there were only 1,000 doses supplied. And in 1,000 doses, if there are 100 adverse events in Canada, that is significant. But if you say 500 million doses supplied in India and you had the same 100 adverse events, then it can be different, right? So you know that 100 out of say 1,000 will be more significant, but 100 in 500 million will not be so much, right? How about the doses per person? That how many doses were given, right? Now, if this vaccine has to be given in the dose of say 2 per person, then in that case, if you supply the same number of vaccines, for example, 500 billion in India, that would mean that 250 million people received the vaccine. How about Canada? So if you say that you supplied only 1,000 doses, what does that mean? Only 500 people got the vaccine, right? And out of 500, 100 got adverse event, right? So the significance increases. How about the duration of administration? Was the adverse event after the first dose itself, or was the adverse event after the second dose? What was the gap between the two doses? For example, if the first vaccine was given 6 weeks ago, and then you gave the second dose and you had the adverse event, or say if the first dose was given 6 months ago, and now you gave the second dose and you had the adverse event, right? So all these parameters need to be thought into, right? Now, why am I telling you this? Because of the concept of patient exposure. Right? You're talking about how many people got exposed to the vaccine and how many people had the adverse event. Now, that constitutes to the denominator. Okay. Now, how many people got exposed and how many people developed adverse event? For example, in India, imagine that 500 million doses were supplied and 250 million people got the vaccine. And out of 250 million, 100 people had an adverse event of anaphylaxis. Now, what does that mean? That 100 people got the adverse event out of 250 million people. So it is 100 upon 250 million. So that is the exposure and the incidence, right? The new cases, I would say, or rather the prevalence in terms of the whole timeline as well. Now, why do you consider this exposure, right? That how many people got the medicine, how many people got the, say, capsule, how many people got the vaccine, or even how many people got the injection, right? So why do you need that? So that you understand how many people have got exposed to the drug, and out of that, how many of them experienced an adverse event. A typical example is that you supplied, say, 1,000 tablets of azithromycin to Africa. Okay, some country in Africa, say Kenya. You supplied 1,000 tablets, and say 5 people got adverse event. And you supplied something like, say, 10,000 tablets in, say, some other country, say Moldova, and you had, say, the same number of people getting adverse event. Is it comparable? Right? So it is not, right? Because you supplied less tablets and you had the same number of adverse event. You supplied the same tablet in some other country and you had the same number of adverse event, right? So that way, this keeps on changing, and that is why you have to consider the patient exposure. And why am I talking about this? And especially when we are learning about aggregate safety reports, because of the concept of person time, and that is something which we need to evaluate in case of aggregate safety reports. Okay, so that is the reason why we are learning about this, and this makes the aggregate safety report unique. Okay, you talk about individual case reports, you are not looking at how many tablets were given in that or supplied in that country, or how many people took the medicine. You are not evaluating. You just have one case and you are evaluating that. You do a data entry, quality review, medical review, and then you consider that adverse event, right? You do causality and so on. However, in case of aggregate safety reports, you are talking about the doses supplied, and also you are talking about the number of adverse events that have happened, right? So it is all about exposure, and at the end of the day, it is benefit versus risk. That if you supplied 1,000 doses and if you had 10 adverse events, or you supplied 1 million doses and you had 10 adverse events, what does that mean? That the benefit is more in terms of the country where I supplied 1 million doses, right? So that way you can understand and you can also demarcate or differentiate, right? So that is all about benefit versus risk, and that is the reason why we need an aggregate safety report. So if you talk about signal management, even that doesn't talk about exposure, okay? Or you talk about risk management plans or anything. So those and all don't talk about exposure. However, an aggregate safety report is all about exposure and in a defined time frame, and that is why we need an aggregate safety report. Now, the requirement for an aggregate safety report may be country or region specific. So it can be, say, US would require something else, India would require something else, Australia would require something else. Now, why region? Region is because when you talk about European Union, so in the entire European Union, you have one regulatory agency or the main regulatory agency, that is the European Medicines Agency, and they define the requirement for the entire European Union, right? So the 28, 29 countries, for them they define what is required. So that way, an aggregate safety report requirement may be country or region specific. Now, broad classification, you just need to remember the names. If you can remember all the names, then well and good. But at least you should know PSUR or DSUR. That should be good enough. Primarily, we are going to divide the aggregate safety reports into the ones which are required during the pre-authorization phases, that is before the approval of the product or after the approval of the product. So when I say before approval, it will be either a DSUR or a developmental safety update report or something called as IND annual report. So this is the report which is in the United States. Then you have the annual safety report of the ASR, which is a requirement in the European Union or by the European Medicines Agency. How about the post authorization? These names will be more familiar. PBRER, PSUR, then PADER. PADER is typical of the United States, periodic adverse drug experience reports. Then in some countries you have periodic summary report, or you also have something called summary bridging report, where you need to connect two different reports. Then you can even have something called addendum to clinical overview. It is more of a European Union requirement, so they would require something additional as well. So these are names. It's good to remember the names, and especially if you are asked during an interview, you can at least tell few of these names. So it will be an advantage. Now, how would you pronounce this? Again, I thought of doing this. So is it PBRER, or is it PBRER, or is it PBRER, or is it PSUR? So again, good to know concept. PBRER, you generally call it as PBRER. Now, if you are in a forum where you say PBRER or PBRER, it may not sound good. But if you say PBRER, somebody would understand that yes, you have learned, or at least you know to pronounce the right term, right? Or the right way. So that way, in case sometime anytime you see this term PBRER, then please remember to pronounce it as PBRER. Okay. Now, how about the start and end date of the periodic summary report or safety report or the aggregate safety report? So, what are the start and end dates? Now, let me tell you that the minimum duration would be 3 months. So, in some countries, you require 3 monthly aggregate safety reports, and the maximum can be any numbers. So, I even seen something like 13 years. So, it can even be as long as that. So, it ranges from 3 months to 13 years or even more. Okay. Now, what is the start date and the end date? Something we will know. So first thing is start date. Start date is the date when the product was approved in that country. Okay, because we are talking about country specific aggregate safety reports. So it is the date when the product was approved in that country. So imagine it's a 2-year report. So assume that the product was approved on 31st December 2019, and say it's a 2-year report. So it will be from 31st December 2019 to 30th of December 2021, right? So that will be 2 years. Now, what about the next report? It will start after the last date of the first report, right? So that way it will go. So start date is the first, for the first report, it is from the date when the product was approved, and then the cycle goes on. Then there is something called as data lock point. So what is data lock point? It is the last date of the PSUR. So if I'm talking about a 2-year PSUR, and say from 31st Jan or 31st December 2019 to 30th December 2021, then the last date, that is 30th December 2021, that becomes the data lock point, because that is the end date of the PSUR. Okay, so this is DLP. Okay, DLP, data lock point. Good to know. In case during the interview they ask you what is DLP, then, and if you know the full form, again that will add to your candidature. Then you also have the concept of international birth date. So this is the globally. Okay, so when you say international, it is the global, where the company may have the product in various countries, and in which country it was approved for the first time. Okay, if now the company has got products in Iran, China, US, India, and say Australia, so in which country it was approved for the first time, and the date, so that is the international birth date. Okay, then Europe has brought in this term concept of EUBD. So what is EUBD? European Union birth date. So as I told you, European Union, you have something like 28, 29 countries. So in all those countries, okay, put together, the first authorization, for example, a product was approved in Spain, France, Germany, and Italy, okay, on different dates. So among these countries, which was the earliest? So that becomes the European Union birth date. Okay, I'll show you with example in some time. So that is the European Union birth date. Okay, good to remember or good to know. Then the European Union came up with the concept of harmonized birth date. Okay, and this was because various companies had various European Union birth date, and they decided to harmonize these dates so that you have one common start date for the PSUR, so that all of them can be submitted at the same time. So I'll show you about that, and before that, one small example of say diclofenac tablet and injection. Now a company has got a diclofenac tablet, and that was approved on 1st March 1977, and they also have the approval for diclofenac injection, that was on the 1st of August 1985. So now if you harmonize and you take the earliest date, so okay, 1st March, so that way that becomes the harmonized birth date, and this can be even across companies. Okay, it should not be only about one company, it can go up across companies. Now how about the timelines for submission? In how many days you need to submit? As I told you, data lock point is the last date of the PSUR, and then you also have the start date. Now after the last date, in how many days you need to submit the PSUR? As I told you, the aggregate safety report may be submitted quarterly, right? Some countries require once in 3 months, and some countries require once in 13 or 14 years, or even more, right? So in how many days you need to submit them? So this will be either 30 calendar days, okay? So that's something remember, you please remember. So 30 calendar days is typical in countries like United States, then even India. So in United States, you require 3 monthly reports to begin with, and you need to submit in 30 days. So in India, you need either 6 monthly or 1 year annual reports, again to be submitted in 30 calendar days. Then you would have 60 calendar days. So 60 calendar days is typical of, again, the United States, where you have say annual reports, right? You prepare reports every year, and you submit it in 60 calendar days. Then even the pre-authorization safety reports like the DSUR, so even that has to be submitted in 60 calendar days. Okay, so 3 monthly reports, 30 days, right? And now we are talking about the pre-authorization safety reports, 60 calendar days. Then you would have 70 calendar days or even 90 calendar days. So these are typically for the PBRER or PBRs. So there you need to submit within 70 or 90 calendar days. So if it is less than 1 year, then you need to submit in 70 calendar days. after the data log point, and if it is more than 1 year, then 90 calendar days after the data log point. So for example, if the data log point is say 28th of February, then, and if your report is less than 1 year, then you would need to submit it by say April 10th or say May 10th, right? So, and if it is say more than 1 year, then you would need to submit it within 3 months. So that comes to around 28th of May, right? So like that it will work. Then you have the concept of late breaking information. I'll quickly tell you what it means. That if you have a data log point and then you submit the PSUR or the aggregate safety report, now you have, as I told you in the previous slide, you have 30 calendar days, 60, 70 or 90 calendar days. So in these or this duration, you may come across a significant adverse event or a signal, or there may be some product withdrawal or something, or a product recall in some country. Anything, if anything happens, then what you need to do is you need to include that as late breaking information or LBI. Good to know, even if you don't remember, no problem, but then it's good to know concept that whatever happens within the submission timelines, that is after the data log point and before the submission, if anything significant happens, then you include that as late breaking information, and that is one of the sections of the PBRER. Okay, so it can be anything, it can be any serious issue, right? Or it can be any problem with regards to the procedure. Okay, please remember this. If you don't remember anything, then at least remember what is LBI, is late breaking information. Okay, then I told you also that DLP is data log point. Please remember. Okay, it's good to know. Then how about the template for submission? Now you might wonder that every company would consider their own templates, right? So this is something which is of no use. If every company does it differently, then the agency will again get confused, and every company will have different content in terms of their aggregate safety reports, and that is why the concept of harmonization came into picture, and we have something called ICH, which is the International Council of Harmonization, ICH, and they have a template. Okay, so initially they had the E2CR1 template, and now it is the E2CR2 template, and now you have the PBRER template, and that is used by all the companies, or say even all the countries. Okay, so that way we have a standard template in place. What I will also do is I will share the link to this document, so that is useful for you, the ICH document, so that you can also get the template. At least you will understand how the PBRER or the PBRER looks like. So that is the reason I will do that. Okay. Now, how about the country specific requirements? I told you, right, that every aggregate safety report requirement for every country is different. Every country, some country would require, some countries wouldn't require at all. Some would require once in 3 months. Some would require annually. Some would have, say, some calendar in place. So it keeps on changing. For example, here you can see, first let me start with Canada. Canada, you need to prepare something every year, and unless asked by the regulatory agency, you wouldn't submit it. Then you have Australia. Australia again, if the agency info tells you, then you have to prepare everything, something every year, right? Every year. Then in India, once you get the approval, you need to do it 6 monthly for 2 years, and then annually for 2 years, and you stop it. Then how about United States? It is quarterly. After the approval, initially you have to do it quarterly for I think 2 or 3 years, and then you do it annually. So either quarterly periodic reports, or it will be annual PADERs, right? The quarterly PADERs or the annual PADERs. And lastly, European Medicines Agency, it's different out here, and I'll show you. They have a calendar. But then before we proceed, I want to tell you one thing, that aggregate safety reports are even required for veterinary medicines, and even for medical devices. Some say in United States, you have something called as a VMSR, voluntary malfunction safety reporting. Then even for cosmetovigilance or cosmetics, you have something called as CPSRs in the European Union. So similar to the concept of aggregate safety reports. So that's something good to know. Now coming back to the European Union. Now European Union, they have the concept of EURD, right? So if you remember, I had told you about the EUBD, right, and also the harmonization information, where in Europe they publish an EURD list. Okay, they publish it on an average once every month. Okay, and in that you will find your product name and the type of license, and it will tell you that when when you would have the next data log point, and also you whether you need to submit or not, and who would review or assess your aggregate safety reports. So that way it is a very nice activity which is done by the European Medicines Agency, where they have standardized everything, or rather harmonized everything, and you need to periodically look into the calendar or the URD list to check what is the status for your product. Right? It's quite dynamic, keeps on changing. That one fine day you find that your product has been deleted, and then say 2-3 months later you find that your product has again got added. So even that can happen in the remotest of the circumstances. So that way you need to keep on monitoring this. Okay, so this is the way it happens in the European Union. So I trust you found this session to be useful and interesting. I didn't want to show you how an aggregate safety report is written, but at least I thought of introducing you to the concept of aggregate safety reporting. That if next time somebody asks you what is a PSUR, you would know, okay, it is a periodic safety update report, and you also know what is PBRER now, and you know also the concepts about DLP, data log point, and if you know and you can remember, then DSUR, and also the late breaking information. So those things, if you can recollect or remember, that will be useful, and especially during the interviews, that will again add value. The most important aspect of an aggregate safety report you should remember is with regards to the patient exposure. Okay, that how many medicines you sold and how many adverse events you got. Right, that is the layman terms, I would say, that how many medicines you sold and how many adverse events you got. So if you sold say 100 tablets and you got 5 adverse events, so that's 5%. But if you sold something like 10,000 tablets and you got 5 adverse events, so that is 0.05%. So that's both are different, right? So you cannot compare. So that is the way it works. Okay, so that's the way pharmacovigilance works and aggregate safety reporting work. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or even suggestions. Okay, thank you and all the best.